Be the Vibe Radio, Season 6, Episode 13.
Wow, your face, really?
Yes, she's obsessed.
Well, obsessed. Like, you have to show them to me. Come on, show them. You have to show them to
Okay.
me. Let me see.
Hello, and welcome to Be the Vibe Radio, where we have real life discussions about real life experiences. Be the Vibe Radio is an educational podcast that promotes liberation through spirituality. I am your host, Latoya Thurman. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Be the Vibe Radio with your favorite hostess, Latoya Thurman, aka Chrysalia's son. It is April 30th, 2025. It has been a while since I've done an episode that was not a wine in the sky. Been busy, super busy, doing a lot of traveling. But today I had to hop on here because y'all, I just saw Sinners. I just saw the movie Sinners, and we have to talk about it. Okay, there's no way that I could see a movie like that and not have a commentary. So first and foremost, if you have not seen the movie, go see it. Definitely go see it. And if you have not seen the movie, you may not want to listen to this episode because there will definitely be spoilers. Okay, so I don't recommend that you listen to this or watch this video unless you've actually seen the movie. But if you have seen the movie, we're about to do a deep dive. We're about to do a deep dive of this movie because yeah, it's yeah, and it's funny because I watched this movie some days ago and I'm still processing it. Like I'm still processing it. And a lot of this video slash episode, because I'm recording this for YouTube, but it'll also be on the podcast. So whether you're listening or watching this episode, yeah, a lot of this will be me processing the movie out loud. So this episode is very much for me, as it is for y'all. So sit tight, grab some water, grab some tea, because we are going to discuss this movie. So first and foremost, y'all know I don't go to movies. Like I do not go to movies. It has been a very long time since I've been to the movies. As a matter of fact, the last movie I saw in the theaters, ironically, was Black Panther, which, if you know, the director of Sinners is the same director for Black Panther. So that speaks a lot to Ryan Coogler as an artist, as a visionary, as a director, as a producer. The fact that this man could get me out into a movie theater, that I will go take time out, pay my hard-earned American dollars to go sit in a movie theater and watch his movies, okay? Um this movie definitely is for the culture. It is unapologetically Black. It is definitely for us, by us, but it's a type of movie where other cultures are represented. And it's interesting. Other cultures that are represented in this movie that are not normally looked at, like not normally mentioned, not normally acknowledged. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it's a type of movie that everybody will enjoy because first and foremost, it's a horror flick, so it is a thriller slash horror. So anyone who likes that genre will like that movie, whether they're Black or not, right? But there is so many layers to this movie that literally there is nuggets for everybody in this movie. Like everyone, I had spent the last week listening to people's takes on social media, and it's funny because originally I was going to post my own takes of this movie on like my TikTok and my Instagram, but somebody, a few of y'all who follow me had a really good suggestion that I actually take my commentary to the podcast, right? And I'm glad you did, because this movie is not something that you can break down in a 3-minute video, a 5-minute video, even a 10-minute video on social media, right? And even with me, as I was doing my notes for this movie, I have about 3-4 pages of notes. And that's just like what I could fit into this podcast, because I really want to do this into a one part. I don't want to break this into like a 2 or 3 part podcast. But I say all that to say that even though Sinners is for the culture, it's a movie that everybody can enjoy, and it's a movie that speaks to everybody, right? With that being said, the way I'm gonna break this down, because it's so layered, is I'm gonna talk about my initial commentary, like my initial takeaways from the movie, and then I'm gonna go into a deeper commentary, speaking on the different parts of the movie that really stood out to me the most, and then I'm going to get into a few. Oh, wait a minute. All right, y'all. My bad. I had to stop the recording and restart it because I had something weird going on with my equipment. So I'm gonna break this down into initial commentary, the initial things that stood out to me, my deeper commentary, which I'm gonna be discussing different scenes that stood out to me the most, and I'm gonna talk about the different characters. And I'm not gonna go into each character, but I'm going to speak to the characters that stood out to me the most or spoke to me the most, right? So that's how I'm doing this analysis. And not to get into too much of the plot, because I don't want to, like, you know, those of you who've seen it have seen it, and then those of you who haven't seen it, I mean, there's spoilers anyway, but I don't want to get too much into the plot. But just to give you a background of it for the context, this movie is set in Jim Crow, rural South of Mississippi. It's about these two brothers that have left Chicago. It's post Prohibition era. They've left Chicago. I believe it might have been post World War One as well, because I think one of the brothers was military, or both of them were military. And they're leaving Chicago. They come home to Mississippi, Clarksdale, and with the intention of opening up a juke joint, right? And so the whole story, the beginning of the story, is about that. Their day and the day where they spend that time preparing to open up this juke joint for that night, right? So there's a lot of setting the stage. There's a lot of introducing these characters. There's a lot of introducing the storyline, and then it leads up into the evening where, like, the thriller horror part of the movie comes into play, right? So my initial commentary about Sinners was, first and foremost, the soundtrack, right? Like, I was blown away about the soundtrack. As someone who plays instruments, I play several instruments. Music really speaks to me. Music really moves me. As someone who's an artist, who's a poet, who is, a storyteller and a griot herself, that part of the movie, first and foremost, from the opening scene, the music, like, had me, like, had me, okay? Which is important because the music, as I mentioned, these brothers are trying to open up a juke joint. The music is an integral part of the storyline, right? It's an integral part of the movie. And so the soundtrack, and I'm a fan of movies with great soundtracks. There's only a few movies I've seen that have a great soundtrack. The Last of the Mohicans is one movie. Really, the soundtrack was better than the movie itself, because the movie itself is trash. But that movie had an amazing soundtrack. Romeo and Juliet, the '90s version with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, that movie had an amazing soundtrack. And Game of Thrones, great Game of Thrones, the series had an amazing soundtrack. So I'm very much moved by movies that have stellar soundtracks. Especially, and Lovecraft Country, and I noticed that Sinners did the same thing that Lovecraft Country did, as far as mixing the genres of music and mixing the eras of music, right? And so Sinners did that as well, right? Because with it being set in 1932 time era, yes, there was a lot of emphasis on the blues, but there was also this aspect of the music transcending time. And so they illustrated that with how they did the soundtrack, right? So there's that. The storytelling, great storytelling, because I'm someone who doesn't go to movies often. I'm more of a, like, streaming shows, right? So you're talking about shows that have seasons, that have, 6, 7, 8 episodes to establish a storyline. So I like the slower moves for the storylines, right? Versus movies that, you only have a short amount of time. So it's like some of them rush the storyline. The movie was about 2.5 hours. The time was perfect, and how it felt sitting in the theater, but also it Ryan Coogler did an amazing job at setting the storyline, timing and pacing the storyline, establishing it, introducing the characters and their background and everything. There's that. This movie was definitely an ode to Lovecraft Country, so it spoke to those of us who missed that show and who loved that show. Remember, Lovecraft Country very much also was for the culture, but it was another show, another storyline that had fans across the board, right? So it was an ode to Lovecraft Country. Now, it was also an ode to From Dusk Till Dawn, and I saw that immediately as the storyline progressed, because I'm someone who loves Quentin Tarantino films, right? So I loved how it was an ode to Quentin Tarantino's From Dusk Till Dawn. The cinematography was amazing, was beautifully, done. I'm also a fan of beautiful cinematography in movies. And the script was just an original story. It took these concepts that are can be seen as played out, and it rewrote them. It introduced them into something fresh, right? And when I say concepts, I mean segregation and Jim Crow storylines, right? Um, Plantation, racial tensions between blacks and whites storyline. The storyline of the vampires, he took that and switched it up and made that also original as well. Add some original elements to it, or some different elements to it, which I'm going to talk about a little later on. Even down to some of the characters, Annie being the hoodoo lady, which I'm going to talk about her as well, but introducing her character and her storyline that is typically told in one way, and then just introduced it into a different light, right? So those were all my initial takeaways when just off gate, right? The music, the storytelling, Lovecraft Country, Dusk Till Dawn, the cinematography, the originality of the script. Because real talk, that's another reason why I don't go to movies, because I'm sick of seeing the same shit, right? The same storylines, the same remakes, the same, you know. That gets old, and it's interesting how, someone made a good point on social media. They said Sinners is proof that Hollywood isn't dead. It's proof that people are looking for new stories to be told, right? And so I feel like Ryan Coogler definitely illustrated that with this movie. Okay, so that was my initial takeaways. Let's get into the deeper commentary. So, first and foremost, I want to go back to the music, because the music was the single most important theme of the movie, right? From the beginning to the very end of the movie, it was all about the music on so many levels, right? And what I appreciate about the storyline is that it illustrated the importance of music, not just Ryan Coogler introduced the music as a means for escape, music as a form of freedom, music as a form of survival, right? There were certain scenes and certain characters who spoke to the music for them being a way that they survived, right? The music being something that transcends culture and transcends time and transcends even the physical realm, right? Because it's the music that attracted the antagonist, Remick, to the juke joint, right? Music as a way to what's the word? As a form of courtship, right? You talk about Sammy, and I can't remember the character's name that he hooked up with, the married girl, and how he was courting her through the music. He was calling to her through the music. They connected through that music, right? And so it's beautiful because for me, I'm someone who is a part of, ATRs, right? And so, as someone who's an Olarisha, we know that we're taught that music is an integral part of our practice. Music is what calls out Orisha. Music is how we birth Orisha. We sing through initiation. It's call and response. And that's the biggest part of African traditions and Black traditions, is this essence of the call and the response, right? And it's throughout all of our practices, even the music in the church, because in the beginning, the very first scene of the movie, Sammy is walking up to his father's church, and you can hear them singing "This Little Light of Mine," and so, you know, the music being in different parts of the culture, the different parts of the significant parts of the movie, right? Um, so again, in hoodoo, music is important. Being able to sing to the ancestors is how we call down the ancestors. The in Orisha practice, or Reiki, is how we call the Orishas down. um Even with me being a part of capoeira, when we play in capoeira, and we have the rodas, it is the instruments, the drums, the singing, the call and response, and the players that play in capoeira, they are dancing to that in addition to playing the game, right? But everything they do in the movements are with the music, right? And the sacred circle. And the sacred circle was also another big theme in the movie as well, right? So, um, it speaks to the meaning of music when it comes to African traditional religions and diasporic traditional religions, and then everyday, day to day aspects of African American livelihood and the music, right? You see the music, them singing the chain gang. You saw the sharecroppers singing and humming as they were picking cotton, right? And so there's that aspect. It also is a reminder of the role of the artist, right? Sammy Sammy is, he is the main character, in essence. And everything that goes on that day, as far as like, um, you know, especially getting into Remick, when Remick comes up on the scene, it's centered on Sammy, right? He's, the first scene where he is singing, his cousin Stack tells him, "Hey, you got this guitar, let me hear you play." And then he starts to play, and Stack is, vibing, but the moment Sammy opens his mouth and starts to sing, you see Stack look at him like, "Oh shit," like, "Oh, you got something there." It's the music and the voice, right? And so in that moment, that story establishes Sammy as a griot. Not just an artist, but a griot, somebody who is able to speak and sing and play, but in a way that speaks to the spirits of those that are listening, right? Speak to the soul of those that are listening. And so it reminds me of a chapter in the Metanatir, right? And it's a book that speaks. It's a book on Kemetic cosmology and philosophy. But there was one part of that book that always stood out to me, and it speaks the role of the artist, right? How artists are vital to communities, and how artists have the ability to raise or lower the vibration of the community. And so, in order to control a community, you control the artist. And so, I feel like there's an underlying um, point that Ryan Coogler is making with Sammy being a griot, right? Um, and how important he was, and how he attracted both the light and the dark with his gift. And I'm going to talk about Remick later, but how Remick came specifically wanting to take Sammy's gift and use it for his own means, right? And that describes the music industry, right? It describes the state of our artists within our Black community, right? And how what happens when we allow outsiders to control um, our storytelling. So the other thing that stood out to me, excuse me, as far as my deeper commentary is, hold on, I had to drink some water on that, is the setting, the place, right? First of all, it was so beautiful that this was set in Mississippi because, as some of you may know, I just took a group down to the Mississippi Delta for a weekend ancestor retreat, right? We went down to Biloxi and Gulfport. We were in Natchez. And so for me to go in spirit, it'd been a while since I had done an ancestral retreat, and the last one I did was in New Orleans. Spirit this time said, no, not New Orleans, go down to Mississippi. And so I did. It was beautiful. It was activating. There was a lot of spiritual energy in Mississippi. And so to turn around and then there's this movie that is set in Mississippi, it was so perfect, right? Because I had just been down there and I had just felt that energy that was so beautifully illustrated in the movie, right? So the setting being Mississippi was a beautiful choice. And then it was like, okay, why Mississippi? Why? Like, out of all the places, why not New Orleans? Why not, Appalachia, or, these other so-called spiritual places? Why not Tennessee? Why not, why not North Carolina, South Carolina, right? I think because there's a lot of, I think the choice for Mississippi and it not being a stereotypical spiritual place was intentional, right? But also because there's so many stories and history in Mississippi that is beautiful, and that is completely overlooked. And I felt that when I was down there. I felt that I was down there. The presence of the First Nations and their spirits, a lot of those First Nations had to be were forced to not had to they were forced to move. They were forced off their land through the Trail of Tears, but their imprints are still there, specifically through the earth mounds, right? So there's that. The history and the connection that African Americans have with Mississippi, and specifically the land, working the plantations, being sharecroppers, right? That energy, and even down to just like the different miscellaneous storylines, within it being set there, the presence of the Chinese, which I'm going to talk about when I talk about the different characters. The presence of the Choctaw, which I'm definitely going to talk about because that scene was hilarious to me. That scene was hilarious to me with them Choctaw, with them natives. The presence of the Irish, in the South. And so there's a rich history in Mississippi, and cultural history that is overlooked. And so I love that Ryan chose that location to be the scene of the movie. Let me get into some key moments though, right? So key moments that stood out to me. The relationship between Sammy and his father, right? The role of the church and how it systematically fails its youth. And the fact that you can see that dynamic back in 1932 and now it's here to 2025 and you see that same thing, right? And it's interesting because the church, the Black Christian church specifically is dying, it's dying in the same way that white supremacy and white colonialism is dying in this country, right? Because of the fact that it's failed its youth, right? So you have Sammy, he's a preacher's son. It's that same story, and that's where a lot of blues comes from. A lot of blues origin stories are these kids were artists. They were musicians, drummers, guitarists, singers. They didn't want to sing in the church. They wanted to sing other types of music. They didn't want to sing religious gospel music, and they were shunned because of that, by their church community. And the thing that makes that so significant is that you're living in a time where, and it's still the case today, where community is your survival, right? The moment you're kicked out in the house, kicked out of your community in the rural South, like that leaves you vulnerable, right? But yet, and still, a lot of those at the time were choosing to leave um, that safety, quote unquote, of that community to go pursue their dreams and go sing the type of music that they want to sing and tell the types of stories that they wanted to tell. And it was so beautiful because there was one point in the movie where, as Sammy's talking to his father, he's like, look, for one night, one day, I just want to be free of all this, right? And you see that, in with within the storyline, you see them working on the plantation. It's hot. You see, now mind you, I don't know if y'all ever picked cotton, or been out in a cotton field, but cotton plants are thorny. They can prick your fingers. It's not an easy plant to harvest, right? So not only is it back breaking and it's, painful, it hurts to pick cotton. But there's sharecroppers, and there's poverty. They live in shacks. You see a lot of the kids, they're wearing, one dress, one long shirt, and they're walking around barefoot, like, so you can see that you have these beautiful characters in this beautiful community, but it's not a happy one. It's a hard life. And so Sammy is in that moment is saying, hey, I just want to be free of this for one day, and his father, being the typical, old school elder, gives him a warning, premonition, and he says, you're going to keep singing to with the sinners, you're going to invite the devils, or something to that effect, right? So it was a very ominous thing, but at the end of the day, it's his dad not showing approval, judging him, and so the relationship with Sammy and his father is specifically, to me, it is a testament to the relationship between the black community and the church overall, because the black church is very much a patriarchy. It's very much a father figure type of, energy, right? And and how the black church fails us as a community, right? Another key moment that stood out to me was the chain gang scene. So there's a moment in the movie where Sammy, Stack, and Delta Slim are driving. And on the road they see a chain gang. And to me that stood out because one, we have ancestors. Those spirits are very much still connected to the railroads because we built those railroads, right? When I've done misas, I've started learning chain gang songs to sing in misas because it very much is, for one, the call and response, the history of the chain gang songs, and they're their own type of hymn, right? That though there's a lot of suffering and a lot of soul, a lot of spirit that is invoked when you sing chain gang songs. And so that really, when I saw that scene, I was like, like, oh my God, because it's like you don't see too many movies that even address the concept of the chain gang, right? So they're singing their song, and Delta Slim, Sammy, and Stack are passing by, and Delta Slim yells something. He tells Stack to slow down. He yells something out of the window. I mean, not the window, out the car, to them. I can't remember what exactly he said, and then they kept driving. And Delta Slim was asked, did he know those people? And he said he knew all of them. And he tells the story that basically is illustrating how he knows them. And ultimately, he speaks to how, they were locked up. They were forced to sing for the warden's entertainment, which is there's another history of that as well, which Kendrick Lamar talks about in Not Like Us. Forced to be a minstrel for white people's entertainment. They were so good and again, the singing for survival, the art for survival, right? um so they get taken on the road or somewhere. Though the warden likes them so much that he takes them to this big party to sing. They make money there, and then Delta Slim talks about how he went and took his money and drank it away because in the movie he's an alcoholic, understandably so considering his story. And um he says that his one of his good friends was going to get out of town and go to Mound Bayou, which is it's a place and there's a history behind that as well. But he didn't make it because he got caught at the train station and was accused and lynched, essentially. They found the money in his pocket, accused him from the show he did, from the entertainment he did, accused him of stealing it, accused him of some other things, and then lynched him right there at the train station, right? And so, so there was that scene that really stood out to me, which was a beautiful scene, and the mention of the chain gang. And then Delta Slim sharing more of his experiences and his pain. And then towards the end, you could tell he gets emotional, but instead of crying, he starts humming. He starts patting his leg. He starts creating a beat. And then from there, Sammy starts playing. And again, it's a beautiful scene that illustrates where blues comes from, which is the suffering of African Americans, right? So that scene was one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Now another favorite scene to me was actually, let me take a break because I need to take a sip of water. And let me go into some more of my favorite scenes. Hold on. Okay, yeah, I had to take a minute. Okay, I'm back. So another scene that really stood out to me, which was my favorite, was Bo and Grace, right? So Bo and Grace are the Chinese American immigrants that they own a store, right? And you see, and I loved it because they had Southern accents. And when I tell you, there's so many layers to that because as someone who lives in Atlanta, I've met Asians with Southern accents, and they're not cosplaying. It's real Southern accents. It's not blackface. It's not a black scent. It's like, no, like these people really grew up here. They got family here, and they're out in their communities, and this is how they speak. So it was beautiful seeing Bo and Grace, these Chinese American immigrants, running the store, having these real ass Southern accents, right? And then also the dynamic, right? Because you notice in the movie, there's the street is segregated. And Smoke goes into the store, the blacks only store where he shops, talking to Bo, which is the owner, the husband. And then it gets to a point where he needs to call his wife. So he asks his daughter, "Hey, go get your mama." The girl walks across the street to the white side and goes into the store where her mama's running a store on the white side. And I fucking love that scene. I love that scene so much because that scene gave me life. I chuckled because first and foremost, one thing Asians is gonna do is they gonna get their money. They're going to get their money, and I love how, in the sense, they were able to capitalize and exploit racism. They were able to open up two stores and sell to both communities, right? So there was some criticism. There's a lot of people vilifying Grace, and I'm going to talk about her character in a little bit deeper. But I didn't see nothing wrong with that. I'm like, yo, that's good business. You know what I'm saying? So there was that. The fact that they own the both stores, the fact of how it's no different than today, where you've got Asians that are only giving loans and only able to rent storefronts in predominantly black neighborhoods, in order to make their money and things like that, right? There's a long history. That scene establishes that there's a long history of that, right? So you got them in the both stores. And it was just so funny to me. It was so funny to me to see that scheme. But even with that, they knew that community. They were a part of that community in the sense that they knew who Stack and Smoke were. They knew the people that were coming in. And whatnot. They had relationships, friendships with these people. Some people accuse Grace of being racist. Her character did not come across as racist. And I'm gonna talk about more about why. And to be honest with you, none of the characters came off as racist except for the husband and wife that initially harbored Remick, and the guy who they sold a Hogwart or something, Hogwood, that was his name. Hogwood, who sold the sawmill to Smoke and Stack. Those are the only real true racist characters that I saw in the movie. Everyone else, I wasn't seeing racism, right? So I love their characters. I loved their role in the community. And also because, as someone who's a history nerd, this movie was very historically accurate. Okay. It was accurate in the sense that, and I've seen now stories of interviews that people are doing with Chinese Americans that have these general stores, these community stores in rural Mississippi, and their role, because, in that, because there's a history of Chinese not being able to buy property or open stores or anywhere else. But also there were stories of blacks not being able to shop anywhere else either. You know what I'm saying? So there was that. Another favorite scene was the Choctaw, right? And so there's a scene. This is the part where we get introduced to Remick, right? So Remick, he falls out of the sky. He's burning. He runs to this couple. I cannot for life of me remember what this couple is, what their names are. But he comes to them and he's running, trying to get safety. He's asking for them to hide him. He's saying that the Choctaw are after him. At first they don't believe him, but then there's a part where he notices the husband has a Klan hood and robe sitting on, I think it was a chair or something. And so when Remick spots that, he starts to say things and do things in order to manipulate, play on their racism, play on them to allow him to get them to move, to hide him. So then they hide him. The Choctaw come, which is beautiful too, because a lot of people don't understand or acknowledge the history of Native Americans in this country. And then a lot of people are not historically or geographically accurate about which Native Americans were in which parts of the country, right? So Choctaw were and are the main Native Americans of the Bayou regions, right? Choctaw, Natchez, and there was one more I can't remember, or there's a few more, but I can't remember exactly. But a lot of the Native Americans that were in the Bayou, the Delta, and the Mississippi Delta regions going into the Bayou in Louisiana, that was Choctaw country, right? And so I love that it was even accurate with even the types of Native Americans that were portrayed. So they come up, they go to the house, and they're like, yo, you got somebody there that we need to grab. And these white folks were like, nah, we didn't see him. They're hiding him, but they're like, no, we haven't seen him. Get off our property. Now, the Native Americans, they know that they're the couple that he's in the house, but at the same time, they're like, it's about to get dark, and we tried to warn you, so we about to get the hell on, and good luck. And I loved it because you literally did not see them Choctaw for the rest of the damn movie. Like, at some point you're thinking maybe they're gonna come up and pop out of nowhere and save the day. Nah, the people went back to their tribe, hunkered down, was like, we're not getting out of these cabins until daylight. and everybody else is on their own. And I love the symbolism of that because I love the symbolism of that because at that point, those Native Americans were looking after their own community. They tried. They were like, okay, you know what? These people aren't listening to us. Now we're about to be in danger. We're out. You know what I'm saying? All we can do is warn them and get on. And I feel like that's a lesson that more and more of us as a community need to learn. You know, letting people fight their own battles and figure it out on their own, right? That was one part of the scene that I really appreciated. The other part of that scene was the white couple, right? And their willingness to harbor another white person that was dangerous because of their own racism, right? So they already had a feeling that something wasn't right with this dude, which is the reason why initially they were not going to bring him in the house, right? They weren't going to save him. But then when he started talking about another threat of the Native Americans, because that couple was racist and they saw the Indians, is what they called them, as more of a threat, they were willing to harbor someone that ended up turning them, if at they were the first people that he turned into vampires, right? So it's the allegory of this idea of how white people, particularly racist, but not even just racist white people, like this is a thing all white people do. They're more likely to protect and enable their own, even if that person is dangerous. And they're willing to protect them at the expense of themselves and their own safety, or and especially at the expense of the community around them, right? Because if that couple had just let them Choctaw take Remick, because he was already burning, they had already fucked him up a bit, right? It was still daylight. He wasn't that strong. Like there was still things, they could have done. If they had just let them Native Americans take him, there wouldn't have been the movie would have been over. The movie would have been over. But their willingness to protect him because he was white, even was at the expense of their own safety, because right after, when the wife sends the Choctaw away, she goes in the back, and Remick had already turned her husband and then turned her into vampires. So another part that stood out to me was at later in the movie when all hell broke loose and they know they're dealing with vampires, and at this point it's just Annie, Smoke, Grace, Delta Slim, Sammy, and Pearline are trapped in the juke joint, right? And they're preparing because they got to survive until dawn, right? There was a part where they were preparing and everything, and Annie slips off somewhere and starts throwing bones. And I love this scene because, and I'm gonna talk again. I'm gonna deep dive into Annie's character, but I loved how she divined on the situation. She took a moment to be like, okay, what are we gonna expect? What's going on? And the fact that it was bones, because um um bone casting, throwing bones is very much a hoodoo thing. It's very much a way that hoodoos perform divinations, and you don't find too many hoodoos nowadays that even know how to throw bones or who even do it, right? And I love that. But then there was something that happened after she threw bones. She went to Smoke and was like, promise me something happens, that you're not gonna let me be a vampire. And I don't know how many people caught the time frame of that, but I think when she threw bones, because she threw twice, she was, she prayed, and she threw the bones, and then she gathered them up, and then she threw them again. I think she saw her death in those bones, and she cast again in order to be sure, right? And I love that scene because it's a very subtle scene that speaks to this idea of divining, to know your outcome or to know what to expect or to know what you're dealing with, right? Um, and in that same theme, and I'm not gonna get too much into that, because again, I'm a deep dive. I'm gonna go into a deep dive about Annie. But the other thing I love was the scene everybody loves when Sammy is in the juke joint and it's finally his time to sing, and he sings "Lie to You." I think that's the name of the song. Where he starts to sing, and then there's moments where he's transcending time. Right? There's different images of ancestors, of Dogon, of past, ancestors, right? They're why, and it's so beautiful because it's like you see people dancing to the song, and it's the people who are part of who are at the juke joint, but then you start seeing these remnants or these images or these flickers of these other beings that are also present dancing as well, and you can tell that they're ethereal. They're spirits, right? They're not physically a part of the party, but they're spiritually a part of the party. So again, you got the Dogon, you've got the ancestors, you've got somebody was drumming, you've got another ancestor playing like another ancient instrument, and then you get into the future, you got somebody scratching a record, you got some folks crip walking, like you got and it was so beautifully done. And then even within all of that, in the background, you see that the juke joint is on fire, like there's this image of it being on fire symbolically, right? And so that was such a beautiful scene, because when I tell y'all, that is exactly what happens when we are in a state of worship. And the worship is not just going to church or going to a drumming or being in a obviously spiritual setting. The worship is the music and the song and the movements of our body, right? And I loved it because it was there for everybody. There's even a point where Grace and Bo are dancing and you see their Chinese ancestors show up, like Sammy was calling on everybody, right? And it was such a beautiful scene for so many reasons. And I loved, as a medium and um as somebody who participates in misas and drummings and speaks to spirits and things like that, that was such an accurate depiction. And it reminded me a lot of the scene in Black Panther when the characters were going to the realm of the ancestors, and they were with that big tree. God, I can't remember the name of the tree. But the tree was a big part of like the where the ancestors gathered to have the conversations and things. And I love that because that tree is accurate. Like I've been in the dream realm and have seen that tree, and I have connected with spirit at that tree in the ancestral realm. And so that, Ryan Coogler, like that man's tapped in. That man's tapped in because he depicts things in his film that you could only know of if you're spiritual. And that not only if you're spiritual, but that you've had direct spiritual experiences. And so that was my thing, sitting through that movie, all 2 hours and 17 minutes of it, and seeing my spiritual experiences brought to screen. Seeing my spiritual experiences brought to screen, I was just like, wow. And in such a beautiful way, right? And so how Sammy was singing, he was piercing the veil, and how he called the light and the dark. So he called those ancestors, but then he also called Remick, and how it's beautiful because you have a storyline where vampire Remick is the antagonist. He's a an ancient 2,000-year-old Irish vampire, Gaelic, really technically, and how in traditional storylines vampires don't have souls, right? In this storyline there was this idea that they do, but at the same time, with and somebody tried to debate me on TikTok about this. I was saying that it was I made mention that the vampires were soulless. Someone was like, well, they are. And he said, Annie said such and such about vampires. But here's my thing about Remick. Remick, there was parts where he sang as well. He was singing Rocky Road to Dublin. He was singing God, it's something, one song of some it was a couple of Irish songs, and there was like, some other things he was singing. And even with him singing, he was not able to call in his ancestors, which is why he wanted Sammy. So my thing is, if Remick had a soul, even though the storyline was that with vampires, their souls are trapped in the body, if the soul was there, Remick would have been able to call his ancestors with his singing. That's my theory, right? Someone tried to argue me down. I was like, whatever, I have my theory. But so that was a beautiful moment. And getting back to Sammy, another beautiful moment was when Sammy was with his father. His father wanted him to practice practice the sermon for that following day, because mind you, this whole movie takes place in one day, from the morning until the next day. And so before Sammy could go off and do what he wanted to do, his dad wanted him to go over the sermon, Corinthians. I can't remember the exact Bible verse, chapter and verse, but I remember it was Corinthians. And Sammy's on the pulpit, he's reciting, and there's a certain point where he closes the book and continues to recite the prayer. And even his dad was like, okay, and after Sammy recites the verse, he's like, can I get my guitar and go? I'm out, and I love that part because it illustrates this idea that that sinners don't know God. It illustrates this assumption or this idea that because you're not in the church and you're not, and you're doing things that are like, you're drinking, you're smoking, you're living a sinful life, that you don't know scripture, that you don't know God, And in that moment, it seemed like there was a subtle jab at Sammy's father, because it was almost this idea that Sammy knew the word and Sammy knew God better than his own father did, and his father was a preacher, So I love that. So yeah, it was that. Another really poignant, I know I'm jumping around because I took notes. So as I was doing my notes, I had to just jot down scenes as I remember. So I know I'm jumping around, but this is not about me giving a play-by-play of the movie. It's about me giving my commentary and analysis of the different points that stood out to me the most, right? So, what I loved, and see, again, people vilify Grace, but I actually liked her character. I understood her character, right? Her character, it wasn't as deep as people made it out to be, right, with her. So what I loved is when Grace finds out that Bo has been turned, right? And she's like, Grace, Bo, her husband now is a vampire. He's trying to get her to come out of the juke joint because, it's a storyline where the vampires can't come in unless they're invited, right? So, at some point they threaten her daughter because they have a child, a daughter. And so they threaten to go get the daughter and turn the daughter if Grace doesn't come out or whatever. So now Grace is freaking out because she's a mother. You know what I'm saying? Like, and as a mother, I understood that, right? She just lost her husband. He's a vampire. And now she got to worry about them going to get her daughter. So I love the part where Grace calls out Smoke for not fighting. Right? She makes a point. She's like, look, nigga, ain't you a warrior? Ain't you military? Ain't you a soldier? You want to sit here and wait for them to come in and kill us and pick us off one by one, or is you finna fight? And I think it's so funny that she was the one who gave that speech and not Annie, which is his love interest, right? So it wasn't even the black woman that gave him the speech. It was the little Chinese lady that was like, look, like they finna get my daughter and we can't sit here all night waiting to die. And I respected Grace for that, because it got Smoke up out his chair. Smoke was sitting there traumatized, his brother was a vampire and shit, everything went to shit. He's still trying to wrap his head around everything that's going on. And Grace was like, look, nigga, we need to do something. And I felt Grace for that, because at the end of the day, Remick wanted Sammy, and he would have kept coming back. It was one of those, we need to get them before they get us, and Remick, they would have kept coming back. They would have kept trying until they got Sammy. You know what I'm saying? They would have turned and started, wreaking havoc on the town and their other loved ones, as it pointed out with Grace's daughter. So I love that. I love when she did that, because she put a fire up under Smoke's ass, um and I don't blame her when she told them to come in, like she was like, no, let's get this to, let's get them. And, Smoke tried to hold her back and cover her mouth, and she bit him, and she was like, come on in, motherfuckers. Like, Grace was ready. Grace was ready. She was lit. She was about that life. And as a mother, I get it. As a mother, like, I felt her in that moment. You know what I'm saying? And so, because I would have been the same. I would have been the same way, Y'all ain't finna, I'm not about to sit here scared all night until the sun comes up. You know what I'm saying? Either they finna get me or I'm finna get them, So I love that scene. And a couple other scenes that I loved was, or things I loved, is the different take on the vampirism, right? The fact that they weren't exactly soulless. The fact that, because these vampires were very humanistic, they still were very much tied to their emotions. They were tied to their communities, their families. And so they felt pain. That was the one thing, like when Annie realized when she hurt one of them, like when she attacked one of them and they responded and cried out in pain, she told Smoke, she's like, oh, they feel pain. That's new. That's a new concept. I haven't seen vampire movies, and I love thrillers and horrors, but I've not seen vampire movies where the vampire feels pain, and so I love that. I love that aspect. I loved how when Annie got bit by Stack and Smoke had to fulfill his promise to her and he had to stake her, how Mary responded, and Mary and Stack were like, when Smoke had to kill Annie, Stack and Mary were like, they were shook up. They were upset over that. The fact that these vampires had emotions. Remix, very like much tortured and pain at losing his culture, losing his land, losing his people, as a result of colonialism, which I'm gonna get into when I talk about the characters. So I love that, it was a different take on the vampirism and the fact that they were still very much human within their role as monsters. I loved the part of the Irish jig, right, where Remick is in the circle and all of the vampires are singing, are walking around him counterclockwise as he's singing. And I can't remember what song he was singing. I don't think it was Pick Robin Clean. It might have been Rocky Road to Dublin. I can't remember which song he was singing in that moment. But what people don't realize is that what that would play in, that was a play on the ring shout. So in the Geechee culture, there's a tradition of the ring shout where you have somebody in the middle singing, and you have people dancing in a circle counterclockwise around the person in the middle, and it's a call and response type of thing, and it's meant to invoke ancestors. It's meant to call in spirit. It's meant as a form of worship. And so but then also somebody pointed out that the Druids, the ancient Druids, which are the ancestors of the Irish, they had a similar practice where they would go around in a circle and counterclockwise for their rituals. So it was a beautiful blending of these two very distinct cultures doing the same thing, right? You got Remick in the middle singing his Irish song with these black folks or vampires doing the ring shout essentially. So that was a beautiful scene, but it was beautiful too because even in that moment, even after that, Remick still couldn't he couldn't bring the spirit in. And that's essentially all he was trying to do the whole movie, was recreate what he lost, which is community and getting back with his ancestors, and I'm gonna talk about him a little bit more because I'm gonna go into the deep dive of all the characters, but the last thing that I want to talk about is the scene at the very, very end, right before Remick is killed, when he's about to turn Sammy, and the only thing Sammy knew to do was to pray Psalms 23. That's the only thing Sammy knew to do. He was like, that boy was terrified. Like, he was like, he was the last one standing, like, in a sense. And so, you know, and he starts to recite Psalms 23, and it doesn't repel Remick, but it calms Remick down. And Remick starts to recite it with him, and all the vampires start to recite it with him. And I love that one is Psalms 23, because that is the black Christian anthem is Psalms 23. Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, etc., etc. He maketh me lie down in green pastures, all of that. He prepared the table before my enemies, all that, right? That's our shit, right? That is Psalms 23 is the black churches, go-to. It's the fact that it calmed the energy, but it didn't stop Remick, and he spoke about how the reason why he knows that prayer is because when his people were colonized by the Anglo-Saxons, by probably the Roman, if it was 2,000 years ago, probably the Roman church, right? I mean, not the Roman church. Rome, when Rome started to become Christian, right? So at the establishment of the Roman church, right? When they were colonizing the different European tribes, they were saying, basically he was saying that the people, probably a priest, because a lot of those priests were coming in, they were colonizing, converting people in order to take their land, right? So basically Remick makes the point that the people that came and took his father's land, and essentially stole their culture, made him learn English, or learn the language and learn those words. And he's just like, in a sense, he hates the prayer, but it brings him comfort, right? And there were so many layers of that, just the energy of Christianity. Like, I can do a whole separate podcast about religion and spirituality as themes in this movie, right? And the different types of colonization that the Christian church has, right? How it cages and what's the word? How the Christian church cages and limits the black community with Sammy and his father, and the judgment of him playing, secular music. And then the role of the Christian church and how it created this antagonist, which is Remick, right? But what I also loved about that scene is that the concept that Christianity cannot save you, right? After everything that happened, that's the only thing Sammy knew how to do, and that still did not save him, right? So that scene was very beautifully done. Okay, so to wrap this up, I want to do a couple quick commentaries about the characters that really stood out to me. So, of course, we got to talk about the main characters, the twins, Smoke and Stack. And first of all, Michael B. Jordan playing both roles, because Ryan, he could have casted actual twins, right? But the fact that he chose to have Michael B. Jordan play both roles was phenomenal. He played the roles, you really do sit there forgetting that it's the same actor, right? So he did amazing in those roles. And the fact that it was twins, right, added such a deep element to it, because of the importance of twins in African culture, the Ibeyi, the Marasa, like the idea of twins as being good luck, as twins as being blessings, right? And just their dynamic and their closeness as twins, how they're very different people but very much connected, right? So I love that aspect of them, and how they complete each other. Like, there's certain aspects about Smoke that Stack definitely needs, and certain elements about Stack that Smoke needs. Smoke is the more serious brother, the business minded brother, more of the protector. And Stack is more of like the class clown, the let's have fun, like, oh, it ain't that serious, and so I love that. I love that dynamic. Let's talk about Annie. Annie's character is beautiful for so many reasons. One, because she is the hoodoo lady, and I will say, as someone who is hoodoo, her depiction was accurate. Everything, like down to what she had in her shack. The kids coming to buy some things, the things she had hanging up, the way she blessed Smoke's mojo bag. That was beautiful. Like, her character as this beautiful, dark, big black woman. But the fact that she wasn't, she's not a mammy though, or an auntie. So most times when people depict larger size black women, dark black women, we're portrayed as um mammies or aunties. We're not the love interest. We're not the wife. We're not the sexual, sensual, character. Annie was all of that. Sexual, sensual, like strong, still very soft, still very nurturing. Um, I loved her connection to her community, because, again, going back to the scene where you introduce her, she's got two little girls. They're buying High John, and they're buying some other things for their mom. Their mom sent them over there to buy this stuff from Annie. She gives them the stuff. They give her the paper that looks like old school food stamp. And for those who are like 80s and 90s babies, like, you remember when they had food stamps before they put the money on the card, and it was like the stack of paper that was like Monopoly paper, and you would go to the stores and pay with your food stamps with that. That's what it looked like, right? And so they pay with that money. She accepts it and everything. And then you have this moment where Smoke is talking to Annie, and he was just like, why don't I give you the real money? Like, this, you can't do nothing with this. And she's like, I don't need your money because it's blood money. Because they was up in Chicago robbing folks. But also, he was like, you can't use that money anywhere else. And she said, I'm not going anywhere else. And that was such a beautiful moment, because it illustrated the real role of the hoodoo, right? The root worker, the conjurer. Our role, because I'm hoodoo, I'm a root worker, our role is in our community. We're active in our communities, right? We know we're supposed to be, right? We're supposed to know the people that come to us. We're supposed to know their kids, their stories, their families. We're supposed to have that rapport with them. We're supposed to be doing our work in our community and serving our community and helping our community. And yes, it's an exchange, because the little girl still paid Annie for the stuff she gave them, but it was the sharecropper money, the plantation money, essentially. And Annie accepted that, and she's like, I'm good. I can get by, I can survive, because that's the other part of Annie's character is, as a root worker, we make do with what we got, and so that was her making do with what she had. And I love that. And even down to her throughout the whole movie, she was the one who figured out that they were dealing with vampires. She's the one that told them what to do to be able to beat the vampires. And, she was hilarious. you know, there were moments where she was, funny and, and all of that. And she was such a beautiful character. And I loved how she was portrayed. And the fact that, if you notice, her accent was different than the other accents. And later, when you first see her in that first scene with Smoke, he's talking and she's talking, and I'm like, her accent's different. Her accent sounds a little Creole. And then later on in the movie, I think Cornbread or somebody insulted her, talking about her Louisiana voodoo something. I'm like, oh, she's from Louisiana. That's where that accent is, And I even love that the details were so on point with this movie that you had the differences of the dialects, of the Southern dialects, because a Creole, a Louisiana accent is very much different than a Mississippi accent, which is very different from the Carolinas and how they talk, very different than how native Georgians talk, you know? So I love that. I love the moment where they talked about the death of their child, Smoke and Annie, and how, he's saying like, there's a part where she's talking to him about, oh, you still have the mojo bag I gave you, and how she was saying how she was doing everything she could to protect him and his brother while they were up in Chicago, robbing niggas and working for Al Capone, right? And he was like, it was a moment where he said, how come you couldn't, if you're doing all this juju protecting, how come your juju didn't save our child? And she was like, I don't know. And I love that moment, that dialogue, because it speaks to how root work can't fix everything, right? Root work can't solve everything. It can't fix everything. And I loved how that was illustrated. I love Sammy's character because him coming in as the griot, coming in as the, not only as a griot, as a musician, he's the youngest one in the group, and the fact that even his youth, like, he's young, but he's wise, he's observant. Like, you can watch him in different parts of the movie where he's literally watching everything going on, not saying anything, because you already know some years down the road, that's going to be a song. You know what I mean? Like, this whole idea of him being the person that sits and observes and then tells the story. So him being the griot, being the musician, him being a preacher's son, that dynamic. And let me pause and talk about the actor who played Sammy, who's a real musician. His voice, his very beautiful, soulful, rich, unique voice, right? Even when he was just talking in the scenes, right? So I loved Sammy's character. Now, Grace is the Chinese immigrant. A lot of people are vilifying her. They're blaming her, like, oh, she's the one that called in the vampires, blah, blah, blah. I get why she did it. I felt like that was necessary because they would have found a way to get in that building anyway, in that juke joint, right? I very much feel like Grace is misunderstood as a character. I feel like she wasn't racist. I feel like she was just a mother, a wife that wanted to protect her family. I loved her spark. Grace was really kind of more of a warrior than anybody in the group besides Delta Slim. Because even the way Delta Slim went out at the end on some kamikaze shit, they was with it. You know what I'm saying? But I loved her character. I loved the layers of her. I loved that she was a warrior. I don't think she was racist. I don't think she was a villain. The villain that people make her out to be. And I love what she represented in that movie, right? And hold on. I want to talk about Remick. I'm going to talk about Remick. Let me take a break. Let me take a quick break to sip some water. And I want to go into a deep dive about Remick. Okay, let's talk about Remick. First of all, I loved Remick's character as an antagonist because if one thing Ryan Coogler is going to do is he's going to write complex villains, right? Because to me, Remick didn't really seem like a villain. Like, he just seemed like, oh God. Like, okay, so first of all, let me just go one by one, because Remick is such a layered character, right? The fact that he is not even a typical villain, because you have a storyline where it is Jim Crow South, rural South, Mississippi, 1930s. Most villains in those types of movies are white. But the fact that Remick was Irish, that's a different type of white, because Irish were also heavily discriminated against, So, so I love that he wasn't the typical type of villain for that, in that sense. And it also speaks to the storyline of the oppressed becoming the oppressor, right? Because you got this Irish vampire that is kind of lost in the sense, because it's like you don't even know how he got. There's no real backstory, right? So you don't know how he got to the States. You don't know how he was made a vampire. You don't know why he's like, why are you in Mississippi when you could be in Ireland? You know what I mean? Like, where did you come from, right? So it's almost like he's lost, he's wandering, and he's kind of longing for this thing what he's lost, his land, his culture, his family, his ancestors, right? Because that was all taken from him. So because he was oppressed, now he becomes the oppressor within the storyline, right? His whole motivation was a longing, right? A longing to reconnect with his ancestors, a longing to have community. Because when he's introduced into the movie, he's by himself, you know. He's not with any other vampires, right? So he's lost, he's wandering, he's alone, and so he wants to reconnect to his culture, reconnect to his ancestors, and regain what's been lost. And so everything that Remick does is motivated by that, right? Which is so interesting, because that's what makes him such an interesting villain, because there's a reason behind his villainy, you know. In most movies, thrillers and things, there's no real reason why the villain's the villain, you know. And I love in the sense that they're wreaking havoc just for the sake of wreaking havoc. But from beginning once Remick locks in on Sammy and is called in by Sammy's voice and singing, Remick has a very clear purpose on why he's doing what he's doing, which is to get Sammy to turn Sammy, so that way Sammy can call and make music and call in Remick's ancestors, right? And it's a very different take on the whole idea of the vampire, because in most movies and shows, there's this idea that vampires do what they do because it's their nature. They kill because it's their nature. They suck blood because it's their nature. They destroy because it's their nature, right? They're sadistic and they don't feel because it's their nature. But then you have a storyline where, you know, these vampires do have souls and feelings and, you know, connections and things like that. And so it's this idea of nature versus need. You know, you have a character who's a vampire, who is doing what he's doing not because of nature, but because of a need. You know, a fucked up need, but a need nonetheless. And I thought that was so interesting. You know, there's very clear reasons why Remick is doing what he's doing, and it did not waver the entire movie. Remick was gonna get Sammy. Like, that was his whole clear intention. He was like, I'm still gonna turn everybody, but I want you, Sammy. And so, you know, I thought that was very interesting. I love the evangelical aspect, you know, because you get to a point where Remick is preachy. And I mean, that's how he drew Marion, who is the white passing character in the movie. He drew her in because of locking in on her pain. Her mother just passed away, and, you know, her hurt over Stack abandoning her. And so he locked in on that to kind of draw her in. And then, you know, even the racist couple that once he turned them, you know, there were things that they were saying throughout the movie that reminded you of evangelical Christians, right? And so I love that the vampires were evangelical, like, in their character. You know, even that's a layered thing. So the evangelical aspect of it was interesting, because even down to there was a point where I just want us all to be one, right? That's what left wing white people talk about, liberal white folks talk about. Oh, we're just one, and let's just all get along, and let's all just, you know. And it's like, it don't work. Our society's not set up for that type of mindset. That's not realistic. And even there's points in the movie where, you know, the black characters were like, yeah, like the part where Remick and his two you know, companions, the racist couple, wanted to come into the juke joint because they were drawn in by the music, and you know, they were like, nah. And Remick was like, I mean, I just want to have a good time. I just want to be in community. And they were like, nah, you know? And Remick was like, well, no, we're just all one, we're all just one, and we just want to have a good time. And they were like, nah. And the reason why is because, and Smoke said it, he's like, okay, it's cool now, but the moment if something happens where those white people are offended, we're in danger. So yes, he was coming in with this all is one attitude, but the reality of their environment was not set up that way. And that's very much this evangelical, like the whole mindset of evangelical Christians is that, right? That very delusional utopian type of let's all be friends, right? Let's all worship God and be of one. And it's not about race. And it's like, well, it's very much about race, right? Something else I want to get into with Remick is him wanting to go into the juke joint and him being denied entry. And it reminded me, it was a symbolism of gentrification, right? That's the biggest thing that stood out to me about that, was this illustration or an allegory of gentrification, because essentially you had these Black folks that bought a sawmill that was abandoned. Nobody wanted, right? Nobody wanted. It was empty. They bought this sawmill, turned it into a juke joint, and brought community together, brought soul together, like brought the soul in, brought the community, brought the fun, brought the music. And Remick felt that and wanted to be a part of that. He wanted to infiltrate that. And essentially they, refused, and he forced his way in anyway, right? Very much a concept of gentrification, right? Black folks moving into these areas that white people don't want to be in. And then the moment we move into these areas and we bring the culture, we bring the music, we bring the fun, they see that they're drawn to that. They want to be a part of that, not realizing that once they come back and they gentrify and they take over, they immediately suck the soul, the culture. That's the first thing they get rid of. And it's to the point where I'm realizing that white people don't even know that's what they are. Like, white people who gentrify don't even realize that's what they're seeking. They're seeking the culture. They're seeking the community, but they don't know how to be in that culture, and they don't know how to be in community. So the first thing they do naturally is destroy it or twist it. And that's what Remick was doing when he started turning the people that were in the juke joint, making them vampires, and how he distorted that community and he perverted that community, right? Or tainted that community, so he was drawn to it because his soul was seeking it, his spirit was seeking it. But then when he tried to mimic and recreate it, it wasn't the same thing, and it immediately sucked the soul and the spirit out of it, right? And that is an allegory for gentrification. And it's so funny because even at the very, very end, the Klan members want, at the very end, there's the part where they come, Hogwood, which is so funny that his name is Hogwood, because you think about hogs, pigs. It's another name for police, and how a lot of police are KKK members, white supremacists. So how Hogwood came with his people to burn up the juke joint and destroy the property that he just sold to Smoke and Stack out of racism and jealousy, which is so crazy because it's a sawmill that they hadn't. It was empty. He owned it. He didn't want it. He sold it. And it wasn't until these Black men showed an interest in it and turned it into something, then they wanted to turn around and snatch it away and take it away, right? So it was that idea that they didn't want this thing, but then they didn't want the Black community to have this juke joint either, right? So that was even a beautiful play on that, right? So just the whole thing. And it was funny because Remick, even with him being the antagonist, he's the one that warned Smoke about, and I think Stack, I think he warned them both that the KKK were going to come and torch his establishment. So Remick even with him being white and being Irish and being a vampire and him being the antagonist, he still put the twins on to game. Like, look, they coming for you. You know what I'm saying? So even that was interesting. I could talk about Mary. I liked her as a character, but she didn't really stand out to me in the same way that the other characters did that I mentioned. The one thing I will say about her is I loved how her storyline, it was illustrated how even white people are not protected from racism, because for her, she was black, one drop rule, right? Her quadroon or octoroon, one of those, her grandfather was black, right? She was white passing, which was funny because they picked the perfect actress, because looking at the actress that played Mary, we could tell that girl wasn't all white. Black folks can tell other black folks. So it was funny how, like white passing is only white passing to white people, right? Black folks, we always know who's black, right? So you had this character who she, was white passing. She goes to Arkansas. She wanted to be was Stack, couldn't be with him, married a white man, went to Arkansas, living as a white woman, very culturally black. There was moments in the movie where she code switched. There was moments in the movie where she said things that was very much the type of lingo that a black woman would say. It was beautifully done, like with her character. But at the end of the day, with her, as white as she looked, and even with the privilege that she had of her skin, she still was not safe from racism, right? And I love that as a theme, because she's talked about how, I think she said her grandfather was black, right? And I might have to watch the movie a couple more times, but if I remember, she was explaining to Sammy that her grandfather was black, and I can't remember if they said that they were going to lynch her grandmother or lynch her mom, but they were saying that they had to do something, because they were the white folks, the mob was going to kill either her mother or her grandmother because of her ancestor being black, right? Now, if it was her mother, which I think they did say her mother, I think it was alluding to the fact that they found out that her mom was half, because that would have made her mom half black. If her grandfather was black, that means she had a white grandmother, and her mother herself was white, was white passing, probably married a white man, but at some point it was found out that her grandparent, she had a black, granddaddy or black daddy. And so with her mother being half white and being white passing, the fact that she was still had some black ancestry still did not make her safe from white people, right? And Mary wasn't safe either, which is the whole reason why Stack was trying to get her gone, right? So I love that storyline too, in the sense that racism isn't even safe for white people. So yeah, that is my analysis. I know this episode was way longer than I wanted it to be, but mainly because I wanted to only do this in one sit. I wanted to be one and done for this analysis of Sinners. I'm definitely gonna go see it again a couple more times. I definitely recommend you guys go see it. And for those who have seen it, what were your thoughts? Like, what were your takeaways? Like, I want a dialogue around this, right? So shoot, if you're listening on Spotify, leave some comments. Tell me what you thought of the movie, what you took away from it. If you're watching on YouTube, I want you in the comments. Tell me what you think about the movie, what your takeaways. My thing is, I gave this analysis speaking from my own experience watching the movie. Everyone's going to have a different take, because everybody's going to be watching from a different lens, right? I watched as a Black woman who is a hoodoo, who's a spiritualist, who is living in the South, right? But there was some commentary of people who were Irish that watched the movie and loved it, and they had their commentary. There was dialogues, white people who saw the movie and their commentary, and and Christians who saw the movie and walked out. They were like, this movie's demonic, which I don't understand why you would see a horror flick called Sinners and then go watch it as a Christian and then be upset that it's a horror movie called Sinners. I don't know. But my point is everybody watch from their own perspective and lens and where they're at. And I want to hear people's takes on this movie. I want to know. So that's it. I'm about to go open my store. I got to get to work now. I hope you guys enjoyed my breakdown of Sinners. Go see the movie. Go see it again. And peace until next time.